3 days after our wedding, I left my husband and asked for divorce. He said, "I never loved you. I only married you for your money." I took away everything I gave him, including the house I bought for his family. 1 week later, he needed me to save his business, but I was done being a fool. Hello, thank you for your support. This means a lot to us. We're on a journey to our first 100 subscribers. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Sandra Brown from London. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. I found the message at 2:14 a.m., 3 days after we said, "I do." His phone lit up on the nightstand just once with the name Trent, don't answer, glowing like a warning I hadn't been smart enough to read before. I wasn't trying to snoop. I was just trying to sleep. The room was too quiet. His breathing was too calm. My head was still buzzing with the sound of champagne toasts and hollow congratulations. I thought maybe the phone would distract me, something stupid, something simple. But it wasn't stupid. And it wasn't simple. The text said, "Relax. I've got the ring. Soon I'll have her account too." That was all. Just that.
No emojis. No hesitachen.
Just certainty. My thumb trembled as I scrolled, not even fully registering that I'd already broken the seal. There were dozens of messages, all dated before the wedding. One said, "She has no idea, man. She thinks this is real." Another, "Her family's loaded. We flip the business, liquidate, and bounce. I'll take care of her after." Take care of. Like I was a task. Like I was already a problem to be solved. I woke him up without meaning to. Or maybe I did. My hand shook the mattress too hard. Or maybe the way I breathed gave me away. He sat up slow, not like a man caught but like a man bored of being misunderstood. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I just held it out to him like a fragile piece of evidence I needed him to label. He didn't even look at the screen. He just looked at me, eyes clear, mouth empty, and said, "I don't love you. I only married you for your money." Like it was obvious. Like it should have been mutual. Like love was a thing neither of us should have expected. I stood up without speaking. My dress from the reception was still crumpled on the floor. The hem had ripped hours earlier when I tripped walking into the hotel elevator, laughing like a fool while he kissed my shoulder and said I was beautiful. Now the fabric felt childish, like a costume I'd outgrown in the span of a single sentence. I didn't cry. That came later. That came when I was barefoot in the hallway, still half drunk on illusion, pressing the elevator button over and over like it would open into a different version of my life. He didn't follow me. Not then. Not ever, really. His love was never the chasing kind. It was performative, contractual, meant for dinner parties, Instagram, and the closing of business deals. I think the first real thing he ever said to me was that confession, "I only married you for your money." At least it had the courtesy of truth. Cruel, yes, but pure. In that moment I realized I'd planned an entire future with a man who had only ever rehearsed the part. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a payout. The elevator doors closed like a stage curtain, and for a second, I saw myself reflected in the metal, mascara smudged, hair flat, neckline creased. A ghost bride. A 3-day wife. I didn't even have a plan. I just wanted out. Out of the suite. Out of the marriage. Out of the trap I hadn't seen being built around me brick by financial brick. The taxi driver didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. There was a dried wine stain on the back of my hand, and I smelled like roses and resignation. I gave him an address I hadn't visited in 2 years, my brother's apartment. He was out of town. The key still worked. The first thing I did was sit on the floor and take off my ring. It was heavier than I remembered. A perfect cut, platinum, conflict-free, something he'd insisted on, which I now understood had nothing to do with ethics. It was an investment piece. Something he could resell. I set it on the countertop like it might burn a hole through. For a while I just stared at it, thinking about how many people had smiled at me that weekend. How many had called me lucky. How many had watched us dance and thought this is love. Not one of them had seen it. Not even me. I drafted the divorce papers that night. I already had a lawyer. I just hadn't known I'd meet her this soon. I sent the text the next morning. Just one line, I'm filing today. Do not contact me. His response came hours later. You're being dramatic. Let's talk. I didn't answer. Not out of spite. Out of self-preservation. If I spoke to him, I might hesitate. If I hesitated, I might explain. And if I explained, he might find a way to sell me one more lie wrapped in charm. I'd had 3 days of that. I didn't need a fourth. The irony is, I'd paid for everything. The dress. The venue. The open bar. The down payment on the house that now had his name on the mailbox. I'd even paid for his mother's surgery last winter. She'd hugged me with tears in her eyes, called me her angel. I wonder if she knew. I wonder if they all knew. Maybe that's what hurts the most. The idea that my love was the joke at someone else's dinner table. That while I was planning a life, they were plotting a transaction. I didn't sleep for 36 hours. Instead, I made lists. Of assets. Of lies. Of people I could trust, which turned out to be fewer than I'd hoped. I called the realtor first. The house was still technically in my name. I'd bought it with my trust fund, and while I'd added his name for partnership optics, I hadn't removed mine. That was my first move. I took back the house. I listed it for sale. His mother would get a call in 2 days. I wondered if she'd call me, crying again. I wouldn't answer. Let her learn the cost of silence. When I finally showered, the water ran pink from my makeup, but I felt dirtier coming out than I had going in. It wasn't just betrayal. It was embarrassment. I had introduced him to my world. Brought him into rooms that had taken me years to earn access to. Trusted him with secrets, with futures. I remembered the night I showed him my childhood journals, how he'd read one and said, "You were such a sad kid," and then laughed. I thought he was just being light. But now I saw it clearly. He didn't see me. He saw a vault. One he thought he'd broken into. But this vault had teeth. I didn't just leave him. I erased myself. It wasn't dramatic, not like he accused in the one text I didn't respond to. There were no long-winded monologues, no confrontation over breakfast, no thrown dishes or slammed doors. Just silence. A withdrawal so clean it looked like death. People underestimate what it means to vanish. They think it's a matter of distance. But distance is geography. Disappearance is strategic. I didn't move out. I unmade the version of me that loved him, that fed him, that wore his ring and smiled in photos. And then I took a scalpel to everything he thought was his. The accounts were first. We'd kept some finances separate, my idea, which he'd once accused me of being cold for suggesting. But now that coldness was leverage. Anything joint I closed. Anything I owned I reclaimed. I spent 8 hours on the phone with banks, lawyers, asset managers. I cited clauses. I used the right phrases. Emotional fraud, undisclosed financial intent, premarital property. I kept my voice calm. Not because I felt calm, but because rage gives people excuses to dismiss you. And I wasn't about to be dismissed. Not again. Not by anyone. The house went next. He hadn't even unpacked all the boxes, hadn't mounted the TV or bought curtains. His mother had picked out the furniture, cheap replicas of high-end brands, soulless and overpolished. I let the realtor handle the call to notify them of the pending sale. I didn't care where they went. Maybe a hotel. Maybe the same apartment complex he used to mock before I elevated him. Either way, they were trespassing now. I didn't warn them. I didn't give them time. I'd paid for every square foot of that house, and I'd only stepped inside it once. Then came the digital purge. Every trace of our wedding gone. I archived the photos, shut down the shared site, and sent takedown requests to every blog and vendor who'd posted about our day. I changed my last name back within 24 hours. Even LinkedIn was updated before the end of the week. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a bride. I saw a woman with nothing left to lose. That version of me, the one who had believed in him, defended him, bent her dreams to fit his insecurities, she was the real casualty. And I buried her without a funeral. What most people don't realize is that when you disappear, people don't chase you, they rewrite you. My silence became a blank canvas for his lies. He told friends I was unstable, said I had commitment issues, whispered that I'd had a breakdown after the wedding. I didn't defend myself. Not publicly. That was the hardest part. Swallowing every urge to correct the record. But I knew the truth had more weight when it dropped all at once. I was waiting. Building. letting the lie metastasize until it was ripe enough to kill everything it touched. I changed my number. Kept the old one active on a backup phone in case he tried to play smart. He did. 12 missed calls in 2 days. For voicemails. One long, rambling message that started with "Hey babe," and ended with "This is your fault." I saved them all. They'd come in handy. He hadn't realized yet that the game had shifted. That I wasn't the naive investor in his dream anymore. That I'd become something colder than angry. Something he couldn't charm, couldn't predict, couldn't control. He still thought this was a fight. He didn't realize he'd already lost. I left the city 2 days later. Not out of fear, out of strategy. I needed space. I needed silence. I rented a loft under my maiden name in a neighborhood he would never enter. Too far from his golf club, too close to real people. The kind who fix their own cars and drink beer from the can. It was perfect. No one there cared about me. No one asked about the ring I no longer wore. I was just another woman with tired eyes and a quiet phone. And in that anonymity, I started to remember who I'd been before I met him. I didn't cry much. Not then. Not in the way people expect. My grief came out in rituals, cleaning, shredding papers, burning old emails. I donated the wedding gifts unopened. I deleted the honeymoon itinerary from my calendar. I took the dress to a donation bin in the rain and left it there like an offering. I didn't want a refund. I wanted distance. He had taken something from me that money couldn't replace, not just time but certainty. The part of me that once trusted easy, that believed effort meant something, that was soft. He didn't just kill the love. He rewrote the code. I started therapy again. Not because I was broken, because I was about to become someone he'd never recognize. My therapist asked me if I still loved him. I laughed. Not the funny kind. The hollow kind that sounds like an empty bottle rolling across the floor. I don't even think I liked him, I said. And it was true. Once the illusion broke, I could see how small he was. How performative his kindness had been. Every compliment was a transaction. Every apology a negotiation. He never loved me. He loved access. He loved proximity to power. And he thought marrying me was his shortcut. What he didn't understand is that shortcuts come with tolls. So I waited. Waited as he began to realize what I'd taken. Not just the money, but the narrative. The image. The perception that he was the man who'd landed someone like me. He started posting vague quotes about toxic women and being used. It was almost poetic, watching him try to play victim. But victims don't drive luxury cars they didn't pay for. Victims don't get sued for fraud. Victims don't text their ex-wives a week later begging to just talk. I didn't respond. Not yet. But I listened. Because silence isn't surrender. It's stage setting. The dress burned slower than I expected. I thought it would go up fast, dramatic. Like in the movies, like pain has a timetable. But silk is stubborn. It curled inward first, then browned like old paper. As if it were reluctant to let go of the shape it had held. I watched it dissolve in the fire pit behind the storage unit I rented under a name that no longer felt like mine. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just stood there until the last sequin turned to ash, and I couldn't smell him on it anymore. It wasn't just the dress. I brought everything. The handwritten vows. The engraved cufflinks. The scrapbook he pretended to love when I gave it to him on the morning of the wedding. I watched the ink bubble and peel, each word blackening into nothing. Love forever, trust burned like lies should. A part of me felt sick afterward, but not from the smoke. It was the clarity. The weightless kind that makes you realize just how long you've been dragging a body that's already dead. I didn't want to keep healing. I wanted to mutate. I wanted evolution by fire. That night I started a file. Not a journal. Not therapy notes. File. Titled plainly, Him. Inside I began to collect everything. Emails, text screenshots, business documents I'd once skimmed out of disinterest. There were patterns in the way he wrote, the way he pitched. Language that sounded impressive but meant nothing. Promises without numbers. Clauses without consequences. I was ashamed of how easily I'd nodded along before. But shame is temporary. Knowledge, however, when it sharpens into motive, is immortal. And I planned to immortalize every inch of this betrayal before I was done. I remembered one night 6 months before the wedding. We were in bed and he was scrolling while I read. He turned to me and said, You're too good at making people feel like they need you. I smiled at the time, took it as a compliment, but now those words came back with acid behind them. That was never admiration. That was assessment. He was studying me, cataloging what made me valuable. I wasn't a woman to him. I was an ecosystem, a self-sustaining one, and he just needed enough charm to tap into the source before draining it dry. In the weeks that followed, I made myself a ritual. Mornings were for cardio and silence. No music, just the sound of my breath syncing with motion. Afternoons were for strategy, revisiting files, updating passwords, calling quiet favors from people who owed me loyalty, not explanations. Evenings were for reminders. I read stories like mine. Women who rebuilt. Women who turned grief into consequence. I didn't romanticize revenge. I dissected it, studied it like architecture. The most devastating revenge, I learned, doesn't arrive in screams or headlines. It arrives dressed as indifference, backed by documentation, and signed by the hand they forgot could write checks or subpoenas. I stopped looking at his social media. It wasn't discipline. It was boredom. His captions were all recycled confidence. Gym mirror selfies with captions about growth. Posing with whiskey he couldn't afford. Trying to look untouched while everything he'd built was already soft at the seams. What he didn't know, what he would never suspect, is that I wasn't coming for his image. I was coming for his leverage. The pipeline. The lifeline. The quiet scaffolding that held up the illusion. The investors he hadn't disclosed. The silent partners he'd lied to. The mistress he'd promised equity to in exchange for patience. Her name was Juliana. She thought she was the real deal. Thought I was the placeholder. I found her by accident, buried in an email thread where he'd forgotten to delete the forwarded trail. I didn't message her. Not yet. That kind of move has to come with precision timing. You don't fire the bullet before the target steps into the light. But I saved everything. Screenshots. Payout agreements. Even the photo he sent her from our honeymoon suite. The one where my back was turned and he'd captioned it, "Soon." I wondered what she thought of that now. If she even knew what he meant. I saw a lawyer again. Not for divorce this time, that was already in motion. But for defamation prep, asset tracing, and a few whispers of corporate misrepresentation. I wanted to be sure I wasn't building a weapon I couldn't legally fire. My lawyer was a woman in her 50s with eyes like she'd seen every form of male ego, and charged hourly to dismantle them. She didn't ask why I was doing this. She just said, "We'll make sure he walks away with nothing he didn't earn." I liked her immediately. She understood the language of justice. Not justice by law. Justice by design. I kept my face off camera during most calls. Used proxies where I could. Burned through email aliases like matchsticks. I didn't want him to know I was awake. I wanted him to think I'd folded. I wanted him to relax. Because people make mistakes when they feel untouchable. He hadn't just underestimated me. He had made a sport of it. Called me soft power. Said I had a quiet presence that calmed the room. I used to take that as strength. Now I saw the insult curled beneath it. Quiet women don't calm rooms. We collect names. We read lips. We wait. I started learning things. Corporate law. Digital forensics. I paid a friend's son to teach me basic penetration testing. Not to break the law, but to know where the cracks lived. It felt good, using my brain like a blade again. For too long, I dimmed myself to be digestible. Played the good partner, the patient listener, the investor with a smile. Now I wanted to be dangerous. Not in volume, in precision. I didn't need to scream. I needed to be accurate. Because the woman who walks away with everything doesn't need to shout. She just needs to show the receipts. People started to notice. Not many, just the observant ones. My posture changed. My laugh became something with edge. I stopped saying yes out of politeness. I stopped explaining my silences. One friend said, "You seem colder." I smiled and said, "No, just accurate." The old me would have softened it. Would have tried to sound palatable. But palatable never saved anyone. Palatable is how predators pick their prey. Now I was poison-tipped. Not so I could kill him fast. So I could kill the version of me he thought would never fight back. He thought I'd stay broken. He mistook my silence for surrender. But I was never silent. I was sharpening. It started with a voicemail. 3 rings. Then the hollow static of his voice trying to sound casual. Hey, just wondering if you'd be open to a conversation. The message ended without a goodbye. I replayed it 3 times, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't.
No apology. No ownership.
Just a request, thinly veiled, like he was trying not to sound desperate while already standing on the edge. He'd waited a week. 7 days without my name. 7 days without my money. 7 days before his illusion began to crumble. Right on schedule. He tried again 2 days later. This time it was a text. Can we talk? I think we rushed into things. There's a lot to fix. Rushed. That was the word he used. As if our entire relationship had been a paperwork error. As if marrying me for my money and then admitting it 3 days later was just a poor choice in pacing. I didn't respond. Not because I hadn't written a dozen biting replies in my head, but because silence has a weight no insult can match. I wanted him to feel it. The nothingness. The void where my love used to be. By the time he called my lawyer, the desperation had teeth. He claimed confusion over the property titles. Said he was open to renegotiating the financial split, if I'd just be reasonable. Reasonable. The word men like him wield when a woman refuses to fold. I listened to the call from a recording my lawyer sent me, earbuds in, pacing the floor of my new apartment. I'd painted the walls white. Clean. Empty. Everything he wasn't. She's emotional right now, he said. She'll come around. I paused the recording there. Let the sentence hang. Let the old version of me die a second time. I knew he'd come crawling. That was never in question. Men like him don't survive exposure. They survive dependency. They plant themselves in the soil of your loyalty and grow roots under your future. Without access they rot. And he was starting to rot. I could see it in the new posts on his feed, vague stories about loyalty, about betrayal, quotes about real ones sticking around. He was talking to ghosts, projecting his story onto people who didn't ask for it. And worst of all, he was trying to rewrite the narrative before the ending arrived. But I had the ending in my pocket, and I was saving it. I didn't reach out, but I let him see me. Once. Briefly. At a coffee shop 2 blocks from his office. I stood in line, calm, no makeup, no jewelry, just presence. I didn't even look at him, but I felt his stare, immediate, sharp, panicked. I could feel the question forming behind his eyes. How is she okay? How is she standing here like she's fine? 'Cause I was fine. Not the performative kind. The dangerous kind. The kind that grows from knowing you've survived the fire and come out sharper. I left before he could speak. Just smiled once like a rumor he couldn't kill. 2 days later he emailed me directly. Long this time. Almost poetic. Said he missed what we had. Called the divorce a reaction. Said the business was struggling without my support but that we could still salvage something. The shift was subtle but deliberate. Salvage. Like I should feel compelled to help. Like he hadn't gutted me and called it ambition. I forwarded it to my attorney and marked it unread. If he wanted to talk partnership, he could wait until I finished building the case that proved he'd never earned one to begin with. What he didn't know was that the walls were already closing in. The first investor had pulled out. Quietly. I'd made sure of that. A friend of a friend gently warned. I didn't frame it as sabotage. I framed it as risk assessment. She's gone quiet and her name was all over the early capital, I'd said. Maybe hold off on your next check. That's all it took. Hesitation. Doubt. Men like him can't survive in environments where confidence is currency. The second pullout came days later. The third after I leaked his inflated profit projections to a contact at a regulatory board. It was satisfying, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't fireworks. It was math. Action and consequence. For every lie he told, I exposed a thread. For every thread, a seam unraveled. He started emailing at odd hours. Shorter messages. Just one line sometimes. I'm sorry. Please. I never responded. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for rescue. He wanted to be saved from the version of himself I had exposed. The one without funding, without narrative, without the woman who made him look legitimate. And now that I was gone, the scaffolding he'd built himself into was beginning to collapse. I got a call from his mother next. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. She cried. Said she didn't know. Said she missed me. Said I was the best thing that ever happened to him. I listened once, then deleted it. Not because I didn't believe her. Maybe she hadn't known. But because it didn't matter. You don't get to claim ignorance after sitting at the table your son poisoned. She hugged me at our wedding. Called me her daughter. She also smiled at him while he lied to my face. Guilt without action is decoration. And I had no use for decoration anymore. 1 week after the first message he showed up. Outside the loft. Hoodie pulled low. Sunglasses he didn't need. I watched from the second floor, lights off, hands still. He stood there for 10 minutes. Didn't knock. Didn't call. Just stood there like he thought I'd feel his presence and come down. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, energetically. Like a man who'd built his whole house out of mirrors and was finally forced to stare into the cracks. I didn't move. I waited until he left. That was the last time he tried in person. The next time we'd speak, it would be on my terms. Because now he needed me. Not emotionally. Not romantically. Economically. And I was done being a fool. I agreed to meet him at a wine bar on the east side. The kind of place we used to go when he was still pretending to be someone else. Exposed brick, jazz playing too low to matter. Overpriced wine in glasses too thin to hold resentment. I wore soft colors, no makeup, and a coat that made me look smaller than I am. The goal wasn't intimidation. It was familiarity. Men like him don't fear confrontation. They fear the moment they think they're winning. Right before they realize they're not. And I wanted him to believe for exactly 1 hour that he still had a chance. He stood when I walked in. That surprised me. It was an old instinct, one he hadn't yet amputated. I sat without a word. His hands fidgeted with the linen napkin, folding and unfolding it like it held a script he kept forgetting. You look good, he said. I didn't answer. Compliments from him were always strategic. Used to gauge softness. To test if the target was still pliable. He ordered a bottle of red. Something expensive enough to seem generous but not so high shelf it'd sting if I left the bill with him. He was always calculating generosity like it was ROI. I've made mistakes, he began. That was the closest he ever got to accountability. The passive voice as if the mistakes had made themselves, and he had simply been standing nearby when they happened. I nodded once, just enough to keep him speaking. I think I lost sight of things, he continued. Of what really mattered. I was scared. I didn't come from your world. I panicked. And I thought if I could just get stability. He didn't finish the sentence. Left the word floating like a cue card he'd forgotten how to read. Stability. He meant money. He meant me. I let him talk. Let him circle the drain of his own rationalizations. It was fascinating in a way to watch a man try to repackage his betrayal as insecurity. You were the first person who ever made me feel like I didn't have to fake it, he said. And I almost laughed. Feel like. That was the trick. He wanted credit for the illusion of vulnerability. He'd built a relationship on borrowed charm, and expected me to accept sincerity, now that the interest rates had ballooned. I sipped my wine. Not because I wanted it, but because it gave me a reason to stay quiet long enough for him to keep digging. I don't want to lose you, he said. Not just because of the business. That word just was a tell. It slipped out too fast, too rehearsed. I looked up then. Met his eyes. That was the moment. The hook. I softened my expression by 1/2 degree. Let my shoulders drop. Tilted my head just enough to let him believe there was still something there to resurrect. I didn't want it to end like this either, I said slow. Controlled. Like a memory he hadn't earned. His mouth parted just slightly. The way it used to when he thought I was about to forgive him. He leaned forward. So, can we figure something out? I've spoken to a few people, and I think there's still a way to keep the company alive. I just need backing. One more cash infusion. I've cleaned up the books. Got rid of a few bad actors. I'm ready to do it right this time. I asked him gently to show me. He didn't hesitate. Pulled out a folder like he'd been hoping for this cue all week. Inside were statements, spreadsheets, projected earnings. I let my fingers trail the edge of the paper, pretending to read while watching his face instead. He was trying not to look too eager. But he was hungry. Desperate. This looks promising, I said. But I'd need control of the board. And full ownership of the original shares I funded. Retroactively, I watched the pulse jump in his neck. It's the only way, I added, to prove I'm protected, that this isn't just another gamble. He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, okay. I can do that. I placed the signed contract I'd prepared in advance on the table. I've had this drawn up. Standard terms. Just needs your signature. I lied with a kind of grace I didn't know I was capable of. I think part of me pitied him then. Not for what was coming, but for how easy he was to predict. He signed it.
No hesitaste.
No questions. He didn't even read the whole thing. Just flipped through, scanning the bolded clauses, pretending competence. I watched him write his name carefully, trying to make it look powerful, like the kind of signature that belongs to a man still in control. He pushed the papers back toward me with a smile so practiced it hurt to look at. I'm glad you're giving me a second chance, he said. I smiled back, touched his hand once gently, like a ghost forgiving its killer. This time, I said, voice barely above a whisper, I'm the one who's lying. I left the bar before he finished his wine. Didn't look back. He texted that night. Said he felt hope for the first time in weeks. Said he couldn't stop thinking about our future. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The papers were already in my lawyer's hands. The clauses he'd ignored gave me full legal control of his company assets. The ownership rights reverted to me immediately upon his signature. And the partnership clause? It nullified itself the moment he breached contract, which he would. I'd already sent the evidence to the regulatory board under anonymous file. That wasn't kindness. That was timing. He'd thought this meeting was redemption. He didn't know it was the kill shot. I didn't need to ruin his life. I just needed him to hand me the match. Took less than a week. The ink on the contract was barely dry when the first call came in from the compliance auditor. Not to him, to me. The ownership transfer triggered a flagged inquiry from a minor board he'd failed to register with. Sloppy. I gave them everything they needed. Cleanly, legally, quietly. No venom. Just facts. The kind that couldn't be spun. Financial discrepancies, falsified projections, investor memos that contradicted public statements. It wasn't just a collapse, it was a slow leak. And I watched him try to plug it with bare hands while the pressure built around him like rising floodwater. I didn't tell him what was coming. I let the paperwork do the speaking. He got the letter on a Monday. A cease and desist. Notification of a pending audit. Demand for a forensic accounting review. His name was still on the marketing, but I owned the foundation now. And the foundation had termites. He called me twice that night. No voicemails. Just the calls. Like maybe hearing the ring would soften me. I blocked the number. Not out of spite. Out of completion. I had nothing more to say. I'd already said everything I needed, with clauses, filings, and silence. His mother called again 2 days later. She wasn't crying this time. She was angry. Said I was being cruel. Said he was trying to fix things. And that I was destroying what could have been saved. I let her speak. Every word sharpened her son's grave. She told me I didn't understand how hard he'd worked. How much pressure he was under. I wanted to ask her if she understood what it felt like to find out your marriage was a business pitch. But I didn't. I let her bury herself in her own delusion. The house she'd lived in, the one I'd reclaimed, was already on the market. The eviction paperwork had been delivered the morning before. The investors began to circle next. Not with interest, but with suspicion. I didn't have to say much. Just forwarded a few emails. Sent over my signed documents. Verified ownership. Once they realized where the real authority now sat, their tone shifted. I went from ex-wife to primary stakeholder in a heartbeat. One even apologized, called me a class act, for the way I was handling the transition. I thanked him politely. Hung up. Then laughed so hard I nearly spilled coffee on my new balance sheet. A class act. That's what they call you when you destroy someone quietly enough to make them respect you for it. He stopped posting for a while. No more mirror selfies. No more whiskey quotes. Just stillness. A digital pause. It was the silence of someone who'd been told the water wasn't rising and suddenly couldn't breathe. He started selling things. His lease car disappeared first. Then the studio office space with the skyline view. I knew what was next. I'd seen the accounts. The burn rate he thought he could hide. He began messaging mutual friends. Playing the misunderstood card. She's punishing me for being honest, he told one of them. I should have lied like everyone else. That part made me pause. Not because it hurt, but because he meant it. He truly believed honesty was his sin, not manipulation. Juliana messaged me the next week. Short. Cold. Guess I was the side piece after all. That was it.
No greeting.
No threat. Just resignation. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She'd already learned the lesson. I wasn't her enemy. I was the mirror. And mirrors are only dangerous when you finally decide to look. He'd promised her equity. Promised her my life repackaged. But now all she had were screenshots and silence. Collateral damage. Not from me. From him. I didn't torch her name. I didn't leak her texts. I didn't need to. He'd written his own obituary. I just handed it to the right people. The public unraveling began when one of the investors filed a civil complaint. Misrepresentation of funds. I watched it hit the trades in a tiny headline. Startup founder under scrutiny after sudden ownership transfer. No one mentioned my name. That was the best part. I'd done it too clean. Too quietly. I was the shadow in the backdrop. The anonymous shift. The ex-wife turned shareholder whose silence said more than any PR statement could. He released a message that afternoon. I've chosen to step back temporarily due to unforeseen complications in my personal life. Unforeseen. As if the flood hadn't been forecasted by every bridge he'd burned. He texted again 2 days later from a new number. I knew it was him. He always used the same cadence. Please. I'm drowning here. You got what you wanted. That was the last line. I reread it once. You got what you wanted. Like I'd won a contest. Like this was about ego. He still didn't understand that it had never been about winning. It was about clarity. About turning on the lights in a house full of ghosts. About making sure that the next time he looked in a mirror, he saw every inch of what he'd tried to hide behind my name. He lost the company within a month. Ownership dissolved. Assets frozen pending investigation. Lawsuits stacking in his inbox like unpaid bills. The brand he'd spent 3 years inflating crumpled in under 30 days. His face disappeared from the About page. New leadership took over. They reached out to me quietly, respectfully. Asked if I wanted to stay on in an advisory capacity. I declined. Not because I couldn't, but because I'd already gotten what I came for. Power isn't about holding the sword. Sometimes it's about walking away while the blade still drips behind you. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But that's wrong. Cold implies emotionless. And this wasn't emotionless. This was meticulous. Strategic. Measured in every breath. He thought revenge would be loud. He expected a scene. A breakdown. A woman wailing at the altar of lost love. What he got instead was a reckoning too quiet to echo. Too precise to escape. And when it was done, when everything he built had turned to salt, I stood in the aftermath untouched. Not because I hadn't burned, but because I learned how to rise through smoke without leaving a single footprint behind. I heard from his brother first. A message that came at midnight, time-stamped like a confession. He's not doing well. Whatever this is, can you ease up? I stared at it for a long time, wondering what this meant to a man like that. Maybe it was the lawsuits. The foreclosure notice on his condo. The complete radio silence from every investor he'd once flaunted. Or maybe it was just the part where the world stopped pretending he was the victim. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have the words, but because there was nothing left for me to say. That wouldn't be a kindness. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. That's not how men like him fall. It came in slow cuts, shallow at first, almost ignorable. A podcast deal that evaporated. A consulting contract that pulled out at the last second. Friends who started canceling drinks, lunches, golf games. Not with cruelty, just with silence. That kind of silence that says, we saw the article. We read the filings. We're not risking the association. I watched it all from a distance. I never had to raise my voice. His empire had been built with borrowed trust. And now that trust was dissolving like sugar in rain. Someone sent me a video clip. Him, drunk at a party, slurring through a rant about betrayal. Said he was set up. That he'd been too generous and too honest with the wrong woman. I watched it once, volume low, and then closed the tab. There was nothing new in it. Just the same story men like him tell when the applause stops. They rewrite the narrative until they're the ones who were loyal, who were real, who were used. But the thing about unraveling is that it doesn't need an audience. It just needs gravity. And gravity, like truth, never asks for permission. My name started to vanish from his mouth after that. I think he realized invoking me only made things worse. I'd become radioactive, untouchable. People stopped asking about me. Stopped believing the version he'd tried to peddle. Maybe because it didn't match the woman they remembered. Maybe because it didn't line up with the paper trail. Or maybe because deep down, they'd known all along that something about his charm felt rehearsed. People always feel it. They just pretend they don't. Until someone walks out of the fire holding receipts, and suddenly everyone remembers the smoke was there the whole time. He tried to pivot, reinvent himself, started posting about mental health and overcoming toxicity. It was almost poetic, the way he tried to recast himself as the survivor of a war he started. He talked about healing like it was a rebrand, changed his profile photo to something grayscale and serious, wrote captions like, "Sometimes the lesson is in the loss." And maybe that works for people who don't know better. But not for the ones who watched him smile while lying. Not for the ones who watched him cash checks he hadn't earned. Not for the ones like me, who stopped being afraid of the truth. What he didn't understand is that I never needed revenge to ruin him. I just needed him to be seen. And now finally he was. Not as the golden boy, not as the visionary, not as the charming risk-taker. Just a man in a crumbling suit, still rehearsing the same lines while the stage lights flickered out one by one. I got reports from mutual acquaintances. "He's been different lately. He's burning through money. He talks about you a lot." I filed them away like weather updates. Unnecessary. Distant. I wasn't checking in. I was confirming the storm had arrived exactly when forecasted. I drove past him once. Not on purpose. Just geography. He was standing outside a WeWork building, phone pressed to his ear, one hand clawing through his hair, like someone trying to hold a thought together that kept slipping away. He didn't see me, and I didn't stop, but I slowed just enough to see the crack in his posture. The way his shoulders no longer squared, the way his weight shifted like he didn't know how to stand still anymore. There was no theater left in him.
No script.
Just a man talking to ghosts through a dead signal. People started calling him paranoid. Said he'd become obsessive. Accused a colleague of spying for me. Fired 2 assistants in a week. I hadn't reached out to anyone. I didn't have to. Paranoia doesn't need evidence. Just consequence. He started leaving long voice memos on burner numbers. Begging, raging, bargaining. Once he even tried sincerity. "I don't sleep anymore. I know you think I'm a monster. Maybe I am. But I swear to God I didn't think it would end like this." I deleted it without listening to the end. If he wanted closure, he could look in the mirror and finish the story himself. They say justice is blind. But I think it sees just fine. It just moves slowly, methodically, waiting for the moment when you least expect the blade. That was me. The blade. The consequence. The thing he thought would always stay dull and silent. He told me once that I had a peaceful energy, that I made him feel safe. What he didn't know is that peace can be a weapon. That safety, when betrayed, turns into something far more precise than rage. It becomes strategy. He thought he'd married calm. He didn't know he'd married his own reckoning. In the end, he wasn't destroyed by scandal. He was destroyed by proof. Quiet, consistent, undeniable proof. He lost deals before he knew they were on the table. Lost trust before the first email was sent. Lost his future not with a bang, but with a box of papers signed under the illusion of a second chance. And I watched every second of it without flinching. Because this wasn't a breakdown. It was an audit. Of his lies. Of my patience. Of every moment I stayed silent while he built a kingdom on borrowed crowns. And when it all collapsed, I didn't toast it. I just turned away and let the ruins speak for themselves. I never went back to the wedding venue. People asked if I wanted a refund, a credit, a redo. As if love was a transaction gone slightly sour. As if you could reorder the past like a botched dinner. I didn't want closure from a place. I wanted closure from the part of me that once knelt before a man and mistook proximity for partnership. And that part of me was long gone, burned, buried, and replaced by someone who understood that real closure never knocks. It walks in uninvited, carrying your old name like a souvenir it never intends to give back. The final decree came in a slim envelope. No ceremony, no drama. Just black ink confirming what I'd already known for months. I was free. I sat with it in the quiet of my new apartment, the one with white walls and no pictures, and stared at my name printed cleanly at the top. Not his. Not hyphenated. Not borrowed. Just mine. Whole. Singular. It didn't make me emotional. It made me accurate. There's a difference between healing and correcting. One is about the wound. The other is about the facts. And I was finally holding the facts in my hand. He stopped reaching out after that. Not suddenly but gradually. Like a dying echo. A final text here, a deleted voicemail there. The desperation unraveled into resignation. And then, finally, into nothing. That was how I knew it was over. Not because he said it, but because he finally understood I wouldn't. That my silence wasn't absence. It was presence without permission. The absence of response isn't an empty space. It's a door that no longer opens. And he had spent too long knocking with the same hands that had once closed it in my face. I didn't answer. I never would again. I kept one thing. Just one. The wedding ring. Not because I missed it. Not because I was sentimental. But because it reminded me how much weight I'd once assigned to the wrong symbols. I had it melted down into a keychain. Simple, silver, discreet. I engraved it with the date he told me the truth. Not the wedding. Not the divorce. The moment in the hotel room when he looked me in the eye and said, "I only married you for your money." That was the moment I was born. That was the moment I stopped being his and started being mine. Sometimes I run into people who knew us. The ones who still pretend they don't read gossip columns, who ask careful questions about how things turned out. I give them the same answer every time. We ended things early. It's vague enough to keep them guessing. Honest enough to be bulletproof. Because that's the real trick. Let them wonder. Let them fill the silence with what-ifs and half-truths. I don't need to correct anyone's version of me. The people who matter already know. And the ones who don't, they were never listening in the first place. I started consulting again. Quietly at first. Then steadily. Word got around. That I was sharp. That I was precise. That I didn't waste time with flattery or fluff. One client called me a scalpel. Clean, exact, surgical. I liked that. Not because I wanted to hurt people, but because I'd spent too long being gentle with men who only understood the language of precision. There's a kind of power in reclaiming your edge, in showing up not with apologies but with invoices. And every time I signed my name to a contract, I remembered the woman who once gave hers away for free. It took time, but the rage faded. Not because I forgave him, but because revenge, once complete, becomes unnecessary. I didn't need to keep hating him. I didn't need to keep repeating the story. I'd already won. Not in court. Not in conversation. From startup panels. From the dinners where people used to name drop him for clout. I kept waiting for him to reinvent himself again. New city, new venture, new name. But I think he's tired. Not from the loss, but from the exposure. It's hard to play a role once the script has been read out loud. And I didn't just read it. I published it. Quietly. Legally. Thoroughly. There was no scandal. Just a sudden lack of oxygen around his brand. Like a balloon finally accepting gravity. I think he'll always wonder how I did it. How I stayed calm. How I saw it all coming and never flinched. The truth is, I didn't. Not at first. I was heartbroken. Humiliated. Hollow. But pain, when listened to closely, becomes a map. And I followed mine like a compass, even when my hands shook. I didn't need to destroy him. I just needed to stop protecting the version of him I used to love. And once I did, the rest was simple. Not easy. Never easy. But clear. And there is no sharper weapon than clarity. Now I wake up and breathe without bracing. My life is quiet but not empty. I fill it with things that don't require permission. Plants, music, friends who speak in full truths. I no longer apologize for being cautious. I no longer feel guilty for walking away from conversations that drain. I know the shape of my own peace now. And I protect it the way I once protected him. Fiercely, blindly, foolishly. Except now the defense is mine. The silence is mine. The future is mine. He gave me 3 days as his wife. I gave myself forever as a storm. If that story hit you in the gut, if you've ever been lied to, used, or underestimated, don't scroll past this. Drop a comment and tell me the moment that broke you. Like this if you felt her power. Share it if you know someone who needs to remember what quiet revenge looks like. And subscribe because this is just the beginning. We're telling the stories they thought we'd stay silent about. See you soon in the next one.